What's up, guys? Today we're going to talk about ghost notes. Let's get into it. So what are ghost notes? Ghost notes are any time you're keeping your stick lower to the snare drum and you're playing a more relaxed sort of tap type of note. So you're not going to have much rebound. It's going to take more control. This whole thing stems on the concept of dynamic control. Dynamic meaning loud and soft in music, right? Dynamics. And so in snare drum, sometimes you're going to play a normal sounding note that has a higher stick height. And how do you do that? Well, if you're playing cross, you got to get out of your own way. I'll see people sometimes playing like this with their hand out here on the outside and the stick on the inside. You can do that if you really want to. It doesn't look good though. The better way to play when you cross is keep the cross nice and natural and come out of the way of the other hand when the other hand needs to play a main snare note on 2 and 4. So get out of the way of the other hand in the first place. This is what most people do when they play cross, whether they know it or not. So with that being said, what you do is you keep the other snare notes that you're going to play that would be ghosted on the inside of that, and you just keep your stick nice and low. And so it's all about stick heights, man. I mean, if you come up too high with your stick, you're not really going to get a ghost note because it's all about the difference in dynamic contrast. You're looking for your main notes to be like way up here. That way you don't have to work as hard when you play a ghost. Or you can also think of it as if your regular accented snares are way up here, then you're going to have a big difference in dynamic contrast. You want it to be dramatic. The more power behind your main snares you can is going to give you that much difference of dynamic than when you're playing your really small ghost notes. So when you first start practicing this, you're not going to have this big of a dynamic difference. And the dynamic difference is what makes the style work. And so what you have to work on, it's going to first start out like this, more than likely. That's how most students are. And then from there, you just work on doing two things. Making your main notes more intense, although you don't have to. It depends, okay? And then also bringing down your ghost notes. So the point is, this is stick height reference right here, okay? So the thing is, when people practice ghost notes, they think it's all about the ghost note, when in reality, it's more about the dynamic contrast between your main snare notes and your ghost notes. So in other words, the main thing that's really important first is stick height and dynamic control, okay? The second thing that's really important is placement. We already mentioned that you don't play ghost notes on 2 and 4. Well, that's really important because what that means is you're going to fill in all the other spaces that are sort of more insignificant with the ghost notes. So a really good groove to start out doing this is 1 and 2 and up to E and 4 and, or you can also think of it as together, part, together, or together, back and forth, together, because you're really just doing this. Now, those two middle snares are sort of less significant, if you will, musically speaking, because they're not 2 and 4. Those are the two snares you can ghost. And this is a great place to get started. When you're practicing ghost notes, do both. Play regular snare notes that are all even, and then practice ghosting the ones that need to be ghosted if you're wanting them to be ghosted. See, the thing is in drumming is you don't actually have to ghost anything. You can always keep your snare notes higher. So why do we use ghost notes in the first place? To get a more dynamic difference in our snare drum. Because snare drum is already pretty intense of a sound. And so the more snares you add in something, you can get away with that, right? I mean, there is songs like there's the Offspring song, Self-Esteem. I mean, that has a lot of snares in it. And so that's like one example that's outside of the main mix of typically if you have a lot of snares in something, you're going to ghost a lot of them that aren't as musically important. So in other words, placement is the second thing that's really important. Where you place the ghost, literally. And so if you don't play on 2 and 4, essentially you get these main placements. 1 E and in the very beginning. So practice that. Then you get the 2 in the middle I just talked about. And now we're almost to the end of the measure. So the E in the beginning, 2, the middle 2, and then the 1 at the very end. Okay? Those are the main places where ghosts happen anyways. It doesn't mean they can't happen other places, but that is the main sort of event, if you will, right? 1 E and 2 and 2 E and 4 and Okay? So those are the places where things are ghosted typically. And so that's what you want to practice. And you can practice that first without ghosts. So 1 E and 2 and 3 E and 4 and then practice the dynamic control of now taking some of those and making them into ghost notes. Or you can just practice everything except for 2 and 4. So this is how to get started with ghosts. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than just this. One way to do a little bit more with it is you can diddle the ghost. And so a diddle is when we throw our wrist down at the drum and we get 2 notes instead of 1. And so how does that work? Well, we're bouncing the stick. We're using the stick's rebound, but we're pushing in on the rebound to get it to bounce. Now, how do you get it to bounce exactly twice and catch it? That's what takes practice. And I could do another video on a diddle and go into it a lot more detail. But essentially, drummers get used to bouncing the stick while only putting the wrist down once. That's how you know you're doing the technique of a diddle. If I go down once and I get 2 notes, that means I'm bouncing. You can also do this with 3 or 4. So it's a control thing, right? A lot of drumming has to do with not only dynamic control, but the stick control and sort of the relationship of the wrist and the rebound and the bounce and all these things that you learn about as a drummer. So in general, what that means is you could take any of these ghost note placements we just talked about and you can diddle them. So there's the E, 1 E and 1 E and 2, all right? But this normally happens at the beginning of things, like a pickup, a 1. Or you could think about it as the end of the measure coming back into the beginning, a 1, 2, 3, 4. It usually happens at the end to kind of give you a little flavor. Or drummers will even go to the extra mile and say that that's really like a drag or a rough or whatever, but drum set style. Because you're playing a diddle into a main primary note, and that's what a drag is. So if you want to get rudimental about it, it's basically like putting a drag into a beat. But, you know, whatever. You can think about however you want to think about it. But that's where the diddle usually is. And what drummers will do a lot is play a diddle, hi-hat, then another goes. Da-da-da, da-da-da. You hear this all the time. So say I'm playing a beat. Boom, pa, da-da-da, boom, pa, boom, pa, da-da-da, boom, pa, boom, pa, da-da-da, boom, pa, boom, pa. Notice one last thing about when you're practicing ghost notes is I'm trying to focus all my attention on the snare and the dynamics of the snare because that's what ghost notes are. And so I'm not really paying that much attention to what's happening in the hi-hat or the bass drum. And that's a good thing. You want the hi-hat to just be a simple pattern when you're doing this. And you want the bass drums to just be very minimal. Because that's typically what happens anyways. Most of the time when you have more snares in something and you're trying to direct the ear towards the snare drum, you're going to have less basses in the groove anyways. So everything I just talked about and a lot more is in my book, The Essential Drummer. So go check it out. Link in my bio if you want. I offer online lessons. Hit me up and we'll get you in the schedule and we'll do a lesson. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you guys on the next one.